somewhere along the way, without a ceremony, without a witness, even without a clean break you could point to, you became someone else. I think that's what's part of what's been disturbing us lately. Not just that life feels strange, not just that people feel harder to understand, not just that the world has developed this thin artificial sheen over everything, like it's been laminated and flattened and stripped of texture. It's that you can feel in some quiet internal place that the person who used to fit here doesn't fit here the same way anymore. The old reactions are gone. The old appetites are inconsistent. The old fears don't grip with the same certainty. Even the things that used to comfort you now sometimes feel like relics from a previous version of your life. And maybe no one else can tell. Maybe to the outside eye, you still look exactly the same. Same face, same routine, same obligations, same messages, same grocery stores, same roads, same coffee mug, same keys in the same bowl by the door. But internally, something has shifted. Something has rearranged itself. A few invisible walls came down. A few hidden corridors opened up. And now you're walking through your own life like someone revisiting a town they once lived in. Recognizing every street and somehow feeling like a foreigner in all of them. In a world full of noise, trust the signal. If you're hearing this, you've already found it. This is Dove and Serpent Radio. And maybe that's what nobody prepares you for, you know. Nobody really tells you that change is rarely cinematic when it matters most. The biggest changes of your life probably not announce themselves with some swelling music and a perfect line of dialogue and some dramatic weather system rolling in at the exact right moment. No, more often it happens in fragments. A sentence you overhear and can't forget. A morning you wake up and you don't want the things you thought you wanted. A season where your own habits start feeling like somebody else's fingerprints all over your day. A random Tuesday when you notice you've become less available to nonsense, less seducible by chaos, less impressed by noise, or maybe more sensitive, more porous, more aware of loneliness in a room full of people, more aware of your own exhaustion, more aware of time, especially time, the way it slides past the ribs, the way whole years can start stacking up behind you like unopened letters. You're tuned to Dove and Serpent Radio. And tonight I keep thinking about the versions of us that die without funerals. Not literal death, though if you stay up late enough, long enough, you start to think about that too. Well, of course you do. I mean those quiet, psychological extinctions. The old self-image that no longer survives contact with experience. The fantasy of who you thought you would be by now. The costume that stopped fitting, but you kept wearing it, right? Because other people had grown comfortable with seeing you wear it. There's grief in that. Real grief. Even when the change is good. Even when growth is happening. Even when some wiser part of you knows this evolution is necessary, there is still grief in realizing an identity has become obsolete. People talk about reinvention like it's glamorous, like it's just a matter of deciding to become new. But that's not what it feels like from the inside. From the inside, it feels more like molting. It feels ugly and disorienting. It feels itchy. It feels vulnerable. It feels like standing in a psychic doorway too long, not belonging to the room behind you anymore, and yet not at ease in the room ahead. You know, I think a lot of people are living there right now, in that in-between state. Too altered to return, too unfinished to arrive. And because we live in a culture that rewards certainty, rewards branding, rewards quick declarations and simple identities and polished narratives, very few people know how to admit that they're in transition. So we fake stability. We double down on old personas. We keep saying things like, this is just who I am, when the truth is that we haven't felt like ourselves in months, maybe years. Maybe what we mean is, this is who everyone already expects me to be, and I don't have the energy to renegotiate that contract. I think that happens. It happens in marriages, happens in families, in careers. It happens online all the time. There are people making content every day from identities they no longer believe in because the machine plays or pays the character better than it pays the truth. And somewhere inside all of that, a weird pressure starts to build because the unlived self doesn't stay quiet forever. It taps on the glass. It shows up as fatigue, as irritability, as strange sadness with no obvious cause, as a recurring fantasy of disappearing, not in the tragic sense necessarily, but in the clean sense, the reset sense. The fantasy of being able to walk away from the whole script, come back as no one in particular. Just to breathe without being interpreted. Just to exist without being continuously translated into a role. There are nights, I think, when what a person really wants is not excitement, not romance, not validation, not even success, but just simple, unobserved existence. To be free from that felt gaze of everyone who has an opinion about who they're supposed to be. And I wonder how much of this modern exhaustion is just really like identity maintenance. Not work alone, not bills alone, not even bad news alone, but the full-time labor of holding together a version of yourself that may no longer be natural. We spend so much energy stabilizing impressions. We answer texts in a tone that maintains continuity. We show up with expressions people recognize. We repeat our known preferences. We act in ways that reassure other people that the map they have of us is still accurate. But what if it isn't? What if you changed? What if the internal architecture moved and nobody got the memo? What if your spirit quietly packed its bags months ago and left the old apartment of selfhood while the body keeps collecting mail there out of habit? It's a very strange experience to realize you have outgrown reactions you still remember having. You can remember how you used to panic. You can remember how badly you used to need approval or control or reassurance or attention or even intensity. You can remember the shape of those hungers, but when the same situation comes now, something in you doesn't rise to meet it in the same way. The trigger is there, and the expected self is absent. There is no old script waiting by the phone, and that can be liberating, yeah, but also kind of eerie. Because if you are not the self that used to answer from that place, who are you exactly? You would think the disappearance of an old wound would feel only good. But it also makes you aware of how much personality was once built around managing that wound. And when the wound loosens its grip, the scaffolding around it can start to wobble too. I read once about a certain species of octopus that can solve problems with a really unnerving intelligence, and then they live these heartbreakingly brief lives, as if nature allowed a burst of alien brilliance and then immediately closed the curtain. There's something haunting about creatures like that. A mind flashes into being, learns the room, manipulates the environment, maybe even seems to play, and then it's gone. Human life is longer, yeah, but sometimes, psychologically, we're not that different. We become dazzlingly adapted to one chapter, one habitat, one configuration of the world, and then the conditions change. Suddenly, the intelligence that helped us survive one season becomes maladaptive in the next. The vigilance that protected you begins to isolate you. The charm that got you loved begins to make you feel unreal. The ambition that got you out begins to make you spiritually homeless. Every trait has a shadow once the environment changes. And maybe that's why adulthood feels so unreal. Not because maturity brings certainty, but because it keeps revealing the tools that you sharpened for one arena cannot solve everything forever. There is a terrible and beautiful instability in that. You finally master one form of being, and then life changes the test. It'd be like training for years to become the world's greatest locksmith, only to discover that all the doors have quietly turned into curtains. You still have the tools, you still know the motions, but the entire problem has changed material on you. You're tuned in to Dove and Serpent Radio, somewhere in the late hours, And if this voice is finding you while the house is quiet, or the road is empty, or the refrigerator is making that low electrical hum from the kitchen like a machine dreaming in blue light, then maybe you know exactly what I mean. Maybe you've been feeling a little out of place in your own habits. Maybe you've caught yourself looking at your life from slightly outside, like an actor who keeps hitting the marks but no longer fully believes in the scene. That's not always a sign that something's wrong. Sometimes it's the first sign that something honest is finally happening. There's a phrase people use when they want to sound comforting. They say things like, "Just be yourself." And I've never fully trusted that sentence, not because it's false, but because it assumes that the self is a stable object sitting somewhere intact, waiting to be retrieved like a coat from a closet. Most of the time, the self is not a solid noun. It's a moving process, a field, a negotiation, a weather pattern with memory. Be yourself sounds simple until you realize that there are multiple selves in the room. The self you became to survive childhood, the self you perform for intimacy, the self you weaponize in conflict, the self that appears when you're alone at 1:43 in the morning and nobody needs anything from you, the self that emerges in crisis, the self that emerges in beauty, the self that shows up in airports, the self that shows up in hospitals, the self that shows up when someone says your name in a certain tone and it unlocks 10 years of history in half a second. Which one is the real one? And that is a dangerous question, maybe even the wrong question. Maybe the better question is like, which one is alive right now? Which one has energy? Which one has truth in it? Which one is not being maintained through obligation alone? Because you can keep a dead self animated for a very long time. If enough people need it from you, you can become a beautiful puppet, efficient, dependable, even admired. But life starts thinning out. Color drains. Curiosity fades. The inner world gets quieter in the bad way, not the peaceful way, but in the under-oxygenated way. Then one day something small breaks the spell. A song, a scent, a dream, an encounter with a stranger, an animal looking at you in a way that feels older than language. And suddenly some buried live wire inside you crackles back on. I had a thought earlier today that maybe a lot of what we call confusion is actually unauthorized growth. Maybe you're not lost. Maybe part of you is simply growing in a direction your current life structure doesn't yet accommodate. Well, that would feel confusing. That would feel inconvenient. That would feel like misalignment, because it is misalignment. But not all misalignment is failure. Some misalignment is the pain of expansion. Like a plant cracking its own pot. Like antlers growing against velvet. Like a structure that was once protective, becoming too small for what it contains. And because human beings are narrative creatures, because we need a story, we often misread that pressure. We think something's wrong with us. We think we're ungrateful. We think we're broken because the old pleasures don't land the same way. We assume our restlessness is pathology. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's depression. Sometimes it's nervous system overload. Sometimes it's grief, wearing 1,000 masks. Sometimes it's also that you have become incapable of pretending that certain things are enough. You've tasted a different layer of reality. And now the flat substitutes feel flat. And that can make you look a little moody to people who are still satisfied by surfaces. There are certain moments in life when the mask falls, not dramatically but mechanically, like a cheap fixture finally loosening after years. You're in a conversation and you can't keep pretending interest. You're in a setting everyone else seems to enjoy, and all you can feel is the fluorescent sadness of it all. You hear the phrases everyone repeats, and suddenly they sound like filler from a species that is hiding from its own depth. And it's not that you become superior. It's not that everyone else is asleep and you alone are awake, right? That's the ego talking in mystical robes. It's simpler and stranger than that. It's just that your sensitivity changed. Your tolerance has changed. Your hunger changed. What once numbed you no longer numbs you. What once dazzled you no longer dazzles you. And the world, unfortunately, keeps offering the same old menu. Time check. Somewhere deep in the hour now. The sort of time when ordinary thoughts loosen and stranger ones begin to drift in from the edges. The sort of time when a person might stand in the bathroom doorway for no reason and forget what they came there for and just stare at themselves in the mirror long enough to feel that brief electric shock of unfamiliarity. And that's a weird human experience, by the way. The face recognition system of the brain suddenly like glitching for half a second and letting you see your own face not as identity, but as object. It happens. A little drop in the stomach. Who is that? Not in a panicked way necessarily, just in a deeply odd way. There you are. There is the costume of you. There is the organism carrying the name. There are the eyes that have watched your whole life. And for a moment it feels as if you are both inside the face and behind it. I think those tiny moments matter. Not because they're supernatural necessarily. Though I'm not arrogant enough to declare that the world is fully explained, but because they reveal how thin our sense of continuity really is. So much of identity is maintained by, uninterrupted recognition and by memory smoothly binding one moment to the next. But disturb the stream just a little, and the whole illusion flickers. Maybe that's why strange experiences, stay with people. A dream that's too vivid. A deja vu event is too exact. A coincidence with too much personality in it. A moment when the world seems to look back. These experiences, puncture the administrative version of reality. And they don't always prove anything beyond themselves, but they make the official story feel provisional. And once that happens, once the story becomes provisional, changes become more thinkable. You know what else changes people? Silence. Real silence. Not passive entertainment with earbuds in, not scrolling in bed. I mean actual unfilled space, the kind that initially feels hostile because it starts reflecting everything back at you. Most people don't realize how much of their identity is continuously reinforced by noise. Noise tells you who you are. Noise keeps your thoughts in their assigned lanes. Noise stops the deeper material from surfacing all at once. But in silence, the sediment stirs. Forgotten desires come up. Old humiliations, strange beauty, ridiculous memory fragments, regrets that were not dead, only sedated, longing that has not had words yet. And among all that, occasionally, a cleaner signal, not loud, usually almost too quiet to trust. But there, a felt sense. This matters. This doesn't. This is over. This is alive. This person drains me. This habit is dead. This direction has heat in it. Silence is how a person begins hearing what has been talking all along beneath the social static. There's a bird called the albatross, massive and ghostly, and it can travel staggering distances over the open ocean using air currents, with such efficiency that it can remain in flight for absurd lengths of time. Imagine that. A creature built for vastness. Imagine what it would mean to put such a creature in a shopping mall. Technically, still a bird. Still alive, still feathered. Still possessing the anatomy of, what it is, but what would its life mean in that setting? What would become of its instincts, its proportions, its purpose? Sometimes I think human misery is not always because we're defective. Sometimes it's because there's an albatross in a shopping mall, a deep self built for vastness, trying to adapt to tiny, repetitive environments, and calling the resulting suffocation a personal failure. Maybe the reason you feel different now is because your internal scale changed. You cannot fit into a small interpretation of life anymore. You cannot pretend your soul is interested only in efficiency and errands and low-grade distraction. I'm not saying you get to abandon responsibility and move into a lighthouse and start speaking only in riddles to passing boats. Although for the right person, give it a week and that starts sounding pretty attractive. I'm just saying a larger self cannot be fed on crumbs forever. It begins to notice. It begins to protest. Quietly at first, then with mood, then with symptoms, and then with rupture. And rupture gets a bad reputation. But some ruptures are merciful. Some ruptures are overdue truth finally entering the room. The friendship that no longer survives honesty. The career path that loses its emotional camouflage. The polished ambition that suddenly tastes like cardboard. The romance that can no longer hide the emptiness under chemistry. The city that once thrilled you now feels acoustically hostile. The version of success you inherited and never actually chose. These revelations can feel catastrophic because they require reorganization. And reorganization costs energy. And by adulthood, most people are already tired, deeply tired, bone tired, soul tired. And not just because of workload, but because of prolonged internal contradiction. And, I think that's part of why late night thought has such power. At night, the social contract weakens a little. The daytime self gets less convincing. The official goals lose some authority. You remember death a little more. You remember mystery a little more. You remember that all this performance is happening on a planet, spinning in dark space, around a star that is itself, moving through a galaxy full of violence and beauty and unknowable scale. Your email tone starts to feel less ultimate under those conditions. Your reputation starts to feel less sacred. The absurdity becomes visible, and so does the tenderness. The fact that anyone loves anyone at all in this brief, strange theater is miraculous. The fact that anyone dares creating anything, confess anything, begin anything. After all the disappointments and losses and embarrassments and failed predictions is extraordinary. People keep becoming, even after being broken. And that may be the most supernatural thing we do. You're listening to Dove and Serpent Radio, and tonight's signal is for the ones who can feel that a former self has fallen away. Maybe not all at once. Maybe not enough that anyone else has commented on it, but enough that your own inner life has become unfamiliar in patches. Enough that certain conversations now feel like reading from a discarded script. Enough that some old coping mechanisms have begun to embarrass you. Enough that some old dreams no longer glitter. Enough that new desires are appearing that you don't yet know how to explain. This is a sacredly awkward stage. There's dignity in it. even if it doesn't feel dignified while we're living it. You know, I think children assume that change is visible. Adults know it's often subterranean. You can spend years changing underground before the first visible crack reaches the surface. And that's, I think, one reason other people so often misunderstand each other. They're responding to the visible lag. The external self is always behind the internal process. By the time someone says, "Wow, you've changed," you've usually been living with that shift privately for a long time. Sometimes painfully, sometimes in total secrecy, sometimes not even consciously. The body knows before the story does. The dreams know before the resume does. Mood knows before language does. There was a season in my life, and maybe you know this kind of season, where I kept thinking I needed the right answer, right? When what I actually needed was permission to stop answering to the wrong one. And that's different. The mind, loves positive solutions because they feel actionable. Start this, build this, learn this, go there, become this. But some transitions are subtractive, right, before they are additive. First, you stop kneeling to what has lost authority over you. First, you let an old image die. First, you admit that certain pursuits are no longer holy just because they once, rescued you. And that can look like stagnation from the outside, yeah. It can look like uncertainty. But internally, it might be a very precise refusal. Refusal is underrated. Clean refusal is one of the greatest developmental milestones of a human being. Not like reflexive rebellion, not the adolescent contrarianism. I mean the mature ability to say no to forms of life that extract vitality from you in exchange for appearances. No to roles that depend on self-betrayal. No to goals that require spiritual amputation. No to environments that flatten your perception. No to relationships where you become more artificial in order to remain loved. The strange thing is that every meaningful yes is built out of those no's, right? Otherwise, your yes is just drift. I saw a video once of a cuttlefish changing color over a checkerboard pattern, skin flashing with this impossible liquid intelligence, as if the body itself were a screen, that could negotiate with the world in real time. I feel like we're not so different. Human beings are astonishing mimics. We change color constantly to belong, to survive, to influence, to avoid conflict, to gain access. We code switch, mood match. We soften, we sharpen, we perform, we conceal. And some of that is, of course, healthy social adaptation, yeah. Some of it is very elegant. Some of it is compassionate. But over years, if you're not careful, the camouflage can become so sophisticated that you forget what your uncamouflaged psyche even feels like. Then a day comes when the adaptation that once kept you safe starts making you sick with unreality. And that sickness is hard to describe because it doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it just feels like, I don't know, emotional sawdust. Like your life has texture but no juice. Like things are functioning but not glowing. And because so many adults are living in some version of that condition, it gets normalized. People call it growing up. They call it realism. They call it responsibility. And yeah, I know adulthood, involves compromise and discipline and patience and sacrifice. But numbness is not proof of maturity. Exhausted falseness is not wisdom. Dryness of soul is not the same thing as steadiness. I think the self sometimes sends up these flares through fascination. I think that's one of the more trustworthy signs. Pay attention to what keeps lighting up your system, even when it makes no immediate practical sense. Not every fascination needs to become a career or a doctrine or a declaration, but fascination is informative. It tells you where your life still has voltage. It tells you where perception sharpens. It tells you what kind of reality your nervous system still wants contact with. The wrong life drains attention. The right direction intensifies it, even if it scares you. Even if it inconveniences your image. Even if it threatens your current arrangements. And yes, fear enters here. Of course it does. Because once you sense that you've changed, the next question becomes, what now? You tell the truth about it. Do you rearrange anything? Do you let people notice? Do you risk becoming less legible to those who liked the old version? I don't know, there's no generic answer. Some changes must be protected in private while they strengthen. Not every, inner shift needs immediate public expression. A seed that gets dragged up daily to check its progress, right? It's going to die on the table. Some truths need enclosure before they can survive weather. But secrecy and denial are not the same thing. Privacy can be sacred. Self-erasure is not. Maybe for now it's enough just to know, just to admit, without dramatizing it and without minimizing it, that you're not exactly who you were. That something has matured or broken open or become disillusioned or become more honest or simply grown tired of participating in its own dilution. That recognition alone changes things. Once you know, you cannot fully unknow. Once you feel the seam in the costume, right? The costume can't become seamless again. I keep thinking of old houses at night, the way they settle, the creaks, the tiny expansion noises in wood and metal as the temperature changes. And during the day, those sounds disappear into activity, But at night, you hear the structure adjusting to unseen conditions. Maybe human beings do the same thing. Maybe a lot of what you're feeling lately is internal settling noises. Not collapse, not failure, not proof that everything is wrong. Just the audible sound of a structure adjusting because reality changed temperature around it. Some people will misunderstand your transition because they only related to the utility you provided in your previous form. That's painful, yeah, but it's clarifying. Others will try to talk you back into older proportions because your growth destabilizes the agreement that they had with you. Also clarifying. A few, the rare few, will sense the truth of what is happening even before you can explain it. And around those people, you will feel your nervous system exhale. Keep an eye on that too. The body knows where it is less edited. There's an odd dignity in becoming harder to entertain and easier to nourish. I think that may be one real sign of real development. Spectacle loses some of its power over you. Noise loses some power. Empty intensity loses some power. In exchange, quieter things start mattering more. Clean air in a room. The right sentence at the right hour. A deep conversation with no performance in it. A walk that restores rhythm. A piece of music that reaches behind your ribs and rearranges the weather in there. A cup of coffee or tea or cold water at exactly the right moment. A dog sleeping nearby. Wind in the trees. The face of someone who knows you without reducing you. This is not becoming boring. This is becoming real. Time check again. It's late enough now that tomorrow is starting to lean in against the windows, even if the sky hasn't admitted it yet. It's late enough that some of you are listening because you can't sleep. And some of you are listening because this is the only hour you actually feel awake. There is a difference. Insomnia is one thing. Night lucidity is another. Some people's minds turn clear only after the social frequencies dim. Maybe that says something about the age. Maybe too much of the day belongs to obligation now. And the soul has learned to wait until the surveillance eases. Before the signal fades tonight, I want to say this plainly. If you feel different now, don't rush to diagnose that feeling as damage. It might be damage, yeah. Be honest with yourself. Get help when help is needed. Rest when rest is needed. Tend to the body. Tend to the mind. But also, leave room for the possibility that what you're feeling is emergence. Leave room for the possibility that some former version of you has simply completed its work. Leave room for the possibility that your discomfort is not only loss, but reconfiguration. Leave room for the possibility that life is trying to become more true inside of you than your current arrangements can yet express. And you don't have to have the new language immediately. You don't need to explain your whole metamorphosis by breakfast. You don't need to convert the mystery into a personal brand or a neat statement or a 5-step plan. Sometimes the next faithful act is smaller than that. Sometimes it's simply refusing to gaslight yourself about what you already know. Sometimes it's withdrawing attention from what deadens you. Sometimes it's protecting one new living thing inside your life, like a candle in weather. Sometimes it's just saying quietly, yes, I have changed. And I'm going to stop pretending that I haven't. Because the truth is, you are never meant to remain static. No living thing does. The river doesn't apologize for new banks. The sky doesn't apologize for changing color. Even stars change their state. Why should we be exempt? Why should our soul stay frozen just to keep other people comfortable with their memory of us? Memory is not a contract. Familiarity is not destiny. Continuity is not holiness. There are seasons when fidelity to life requires discontinuity in form. And maybe that's what you're in now. Not a breakdown. Not a mistake. Not a vague, bad mood with a dramatic soundtrack. Maybe this is an initiation so quiet you almost missed it. The old self dimming. The deeper self taking measurements. The world looking slightly unfamiliar because your eyes are no longer calibrated to the same illusions. That's unsettling, yeah. But it may also be the beginning of a more honest life. So, if tonight you've been feeling that strange gap between who you've been and who you're becoming, if your old habits have started to feel a little haunted, if certain rooms in your life now echo differently than they used to, take that seriously, not fearfully, not theatrically, just seriously. You changed, or you are changing. And though the culture rarely knows how to honor invisible transformation, that does not make them any less real. Some of the most important events of your life will occur without witnesses. This may be one of them. You're tuned to Dove and Serpent Radio. Keep the signal. Protect what is becoming true in you. Not everything that feels unfamiliar is wrong. Sometimes unfamiliar is the first honest thing that has happened in a long time. Until next time, keep keep the dial somewhere between wonder and understanding.